We are now recording. So welcome, Joe. Thank you for coming to teach again today and give this class to us. Our instructors and volunteers are what are making this possible. So we can't thank you enough for joining us at To Live to Cure today to do this. And so Joe, this class is going to go until about 12:20, 12:25. If you have any questions, feel free to make your comments in the chat box and we'll monitor those for the end. And this is being recorded again, so if you don't want to be on the recording, feel free to cut out your video or mute your microphone. Enjoy, Joe, and thank you so much. I'll let you introduce yourself and get going.
Thank you. My name is Joanne Matson-Tanberg, and I live in White Salmon, Washington, usually, which is on the Oregon-Washington border. And I'm a yoga instructor first I became a yoga instructor, which led me to learn and go back to school to become an Ayurvedic wellness counselor. I practice Ayurveda both with myself, my family, and with clients. And through that journey, I also started learning about the cannabis plant as a healing herb. So I was taking herbs for everything. Oh, there we go. And so I also became a cannabis clinician. So I help guide people naturally through holistic forms of medicine to find healing in their own unique way, because we're all so completely different and based on the tenets of Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is a medical science. It's considered to be the oldest in the world, at least 5,000 years that we know of and written, and then we believe from how it was passed down in the oral tradition to go back at least 10,000 years. But it's hard to prove something when it's not written down. It was always handed down orally from parents to children so that every single family would have the wisdom of Ayurveda within their home and within their communities, so that there was always people that could help others with their healing. And Ayurveda is the word itself. It's A-Y-U-R. So it's like it's weird letters in English that we don't put together, Ayur. So Ayur is the root of Ayur, if you were to narrow it down to like one word, which is hard to do when you're converting Sanskrit to English, is life. And Veda is wisdom or science of. And so Ayurveda is literally the science, the wisdom of understanding life, and how that affects everything in the universe. And Ayurveda is about balance. It's about living with one's constitution, and a constitution, the energies that help direct your life are what you're born with. You don't have a choice in that matter. If we go into the spiritual and more of the esoteric studies, we might be able to find reason that we might have had a choice in that of how we chose our parents, but that's another conversation for another day. So Ayurveda looks at first and foremost, the energies that create every single thing in the universe. And those energies are space or ether. And as ether condenses, it becomes air, or the movement is air as we know it. Air, space, air, fire, water, and earth. So if you look at anything, a tree, a flower, your hand, a brick, a mountain, a leaf, a droplet of water, a fish, anything you can think of, we can break that down into the different energies that make it up, and which energies dominate and which ones are of the lesser quantity. And those 5 elements are broken into 3 energies. And those 3 energies, very loosely, are air, fire, and water. Or air, fire, and earth. We kind of intermix the water and the earth element. And they have names. I won't get into Sanskrit today. I'll say them once, but I don't want you to get caught up in that. But those energies are called doshas. So you may have, if you've ever been to a yoga studio or on, an online wellness community, or even to a Veda salon or hair makeup place, they loosely base, well, actually a little bit more than loosely, base their product line on these different energies, these doshas. And Vata is known as the wind energy. Pitta is known as the fire energy, and Kapha is known as the earth, water energies. So we all have all 3 of those, every single living thing in the universe. Some of us have a lot of fire. Some of us have a lot of earth and some of us have a lot of air. And then we might have a secondary extra of one of those energies. And then kind of like the third child in the back seat that's like, don't forget about me. I'm still pretty important back here. They're all a part of who you are. And I'm not going to like really dive in and talk like the science of Ayurveda too deeply, because it's such a big topic, and it's a lifelong study. And so I want to talk a little bit about it, and then I'm going to backtrack and tell my personal story, and you can see how it relates in real life. But these three doshas are in charge of all the workings. Let's just break it down to the human, in the human body, and starting with Vata, because Vata is the energy of movement. And so if you think about the wind, if you think about when the wind blows, how everything is affected, you know, even the story or the science that we learn about when one bird flaps its wings or one butterfly flaps its wings, how that affects things across the universe, across the planet. And that's how the Vata energy is. So within our bodies, when we speak of Vata, we're thinking about how everything within us is moving. Our blood is circulating. Our gastric juices are going down with our food and helping to break up nutrients from waste. Our menses for women, feces and urine and everything has to come out. It's moving. When we swallow, when we sneeze, when we breathe, it's all energy of movement. And so that is the Vata energy as it's controlling all of these other elements within our body. And it also can affect our mind. So Vata often is the dosha of creativity. So if you're someone, and when we look at the doshas, let me back up just a second. When we look at the doshas, we, as a practitioner or a counselor, we'll ask you a bunch of questions. Like if you sat down with me, we might spend an hour and a half, and I'll either have you fill out a form or I'll ask you the questions myself. And I'm going to be looking at your structure, your hair. I might look at your hands, what kind of skin you have. I'm going to look at the types of eyes, the shape of your eyes, the color of your eyes, the color of your skin, if it's more rosy or if it's more dark, or if it's pale, or if it's oily, it's dry. I mean, all these things are telltale signs to understand which doshas or which energies are your dominant ones. And when we know that, then we can find out where you might have an imbalance. So if I can figure out how you were born, you know, were you born with extra fire, extra air, or extra earth? And that's going to be determined by your parents and where they were born. And it's definitely a genetic, without looking at genetics through a microscope, type of understanding. But if you're someone that has a lot of excessive air energy or Vata energy, that affects us. If you think of movement and thoughts, you know, thoughts are not concrete. They're moving. They're going through your head all the time. Well, they're going through my head all the time. And with those thoughts, that is an excessive energy or creative energy. And sometimes it's wonderful. Sometimes it's too much and it creates an anxiety. And we need to then slow down. You know, think about that voice in your head. If it's constantly talking and you have that ADD feeling and you're running around doing 20 things at once, what is the one thing that is going to help bring down that helium balloon that's flying around? Some kind of weight, some kind of earthen weight. And I think of the balloon all the time, because if you put a balloon up and you're holding the string and it's flying all over the place, the only way to pull that down is to put a brick on it or something heavy and let it get grounded. And so when we're working with Vata energy, first and foremost, because it is the dominant energy that controls all the movement in our mind and our body, we then look for the opposite qualities, which is to get grounded, which is to get earthen. And that is what we look at in Ayurveda, is to balance. If you're someone that has an excessive, well, everyone has pitta, but you have an excessive amount of fire, fire is the element of transformation. So if you think about when you put food over fire, it changes, it cooks. When you bring the sun out and you plant seeds, it helps change the seed into a plant, into a flower, tree, whatever it is. Same thing within our bodies. The fire element helps us with our perception. When we look at something through our eyes, you know, we're actually seeing images and they get flipped around with our optics. That is a change, it's a shift that's happening that is governed by the fire energy. When we eat food and our gastric juices, our internal juices or acid helps to break that food down and even know what type and how much of that acid is necessary depending on the foods we eat. That is a transformation that is governed by fire. Anything that has to do with circulation, blood, our heart, we also consider what kind of how strong is your fire, or how weak is your fire? Is it strong enough to keep all these processes going, or does it need to be stoked and enlivened? When we don't have enough fire, we might notice that we have a sluggishness, or we have an inability to digest our food, or our menses are not quite operating correctly. There's a lot of different ways we can look at this. We might have issues with our skin. We might have rosacea, or too many types of inflammations within our body, and redness, and that's showing too much of something. So to cool off the body, we would bring in elements, both through our routine, through the foods we eat, maybe herbs that we ingest, that would help to reverse this, to cool off the fire. If we're someone that has, we all, again, have all these energies, but has an excessive amount of the kapha, or the earth energy, that is the energy that is necessary in every single structure and every single organism for structure, for our ability to hold it all together, our soft tissue, our fascia, our muscles, our brain, our stomach, even, where things get held and then diverge in and through the gastrointestinal system. When we have an excessive amount of this earthen energy, this earth and water energy, we might feel heavy, we might feel sluggish, we might even lean towards obesity. We might have blockages within our body that affect our digestion and our ability to have our blood flow, clearly and fluidly through our circulatory system. So we would look at ways to enliven, maybe to dry up some of that moisture and spark some of the energy necessary through routines, through more action, through more fiery foods. So if it's too much fire, we cool off with our foods. If it's too much earth, we want to heat up those foods. If it's too much air, we want to ground with our foods, just as an example. So Ayurveda, first and foremost, looks at the energy behind who you are as a human. And you can ask yourself some questions pretty much right off. And I'm going to be kind of generic here, but just to give you an idea, and then you can kind of go online and play with it yourself. But, if you're someone who's maybe excessively tall or thin, thinner hair, straight hair, typically, not always. If you're someone who has a kind of a disruptive digestion, maybe you tend towards nervousness and anxiety, you might consider yourself very creative, you might consider yourself a bit attention disorder, like you just can't sit still, you likely have a lot of this vata energy, this air energy, which is a beautiful, creative, visionary energy to have. But if it's not encapsulated and really grounded, then it can take you all over the place, and you can find yourself with dry hair, dry skin, dry nails, constipation, irregular sleep schedules, like I said before, anxiety, neurological disorders. So we have disorders, we have diseases that fall in line when different doshas are aggravated. We have herbs, foods, routines that we introduce to help bring that aggravated dosha back into balance, because when one dosha comes into balance, the other doshas tend to also fall into balance. And we find ourselves back to, as some people will say, manufacturer spec details, like how you were meant to be when you were born, that thriving individual that every one of us hopefully has the ability to achieve in their lifetime. If you're someone who has maybe a medium build and really sharp intellect and maybe some piercing blue eyes in some cases, strong digestion, you feel like you can eat anything, but you also tend to maybe have redness in your skin, or more inflammation in sensitive areas on your body. You might tend to have acid reflux, or high blood pressure, or get angry or jealous easily. You might have a lot of excess fire. You might just be naturally fiery and have to then learn ways to cool off the fire, to stabilize that fire, to control the fire, and then to use that fire to your advantage. People that have an excessive pitta or fire in their highest dosha tend to be leaders. They tend to run companies. They tend to run the military. They might even go even higher type of leadership skills, but they also tend to go out of balance in a way that they work too much. They don't take as good care of themselves, or they push themselves so hard because they compete with themselves and they're adrenaline junkies till they burn out. So you might be like, oh, that kind of sounds like me. And you might say both those first two sounded like you, and that can be very common too. We can have two doshas that are very similar, or they're very weighted similarly, that can affect you positively or negatively if they're not really kept in check and understood. Once you understand them, it makes a huge difference. Kapha. So you might be someone that has maybe a little heavier structure. You can lift anything. You're strong. You've got thicker hair. Maybe your skin is soft and cool to the touch. You get cold easy in your extremities. You may feel that food doesn't always digest as quickly. You might be tired after you eat. You may find yourself getting stuck in routines or lethargy or depression. That would be an excessive amount or maybe an imbalance of your earth energy, your kapha energy. And keeping in mind, we have all three, every single one of us, but we're going to notice, and throughout our lifetime, in different stages in our life, we'll notice when different doshas are more aggravated or more pronounced, and when they tend to take the back seat. With kapha, for instance, people that might find that they have fallen into an aggravated state or too much kapha would have some of those different issues I mentioned, like the obesity or even diabetes, depression. They would then look to find, with an understanding of Ayurveda, how to spark and shift and change through foods, through diet, routine, and herbs to create more of a stimulating effect to help break up that stagnation, if you will. So those three doshas they affect our mind, they affect our physical body, they affect our spirit and how we kind of look at the world. We also have different ways of understanding the mind only, and I won't get so much into those. They're called our gunas. And we can have a very calm and peaceful mind. We can have a really movement energy, always moving around and trying to solve everything mind, or we can have a very almost stuck in your ways and can't really, foggy mind. And so in Ayurveda, we're looking at both of those different ways of understanding energy of the full body, mind, and then just the mind. Because ultimately, we would like to find ourselves in this beautiful balance of all of our doshas in whatever natural way that is. For me, a balance is my vata is my predominant, but I'm not spinning out of control. My pitta is just second, the fire, but I'm not so fiery that I'm having digestive issues. And my kapha needs to usually be stoked a little bit. I need to remember that I even have enough structure because I tend to be so much in my head. And so finding ways to ground myself and eating more, the right foods and things of that nature. So a lot of people ask me, how did I even end up learning about something that many of us, including myself, can't pronounce? It took me a long time to say Ayurveda. Now it falls off my tongue. But many years ago, back in 1991, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And at the time, I had a pretty firm understanding of Crohn's disease because my dad had it. And it was just something that I knew about. But I knew more about it from his being in the bathroom all the time. As a kid, it's like so embarrassing. Oh my God, my dad's in the bathroom all the time and taking pills for this and pills for that. He had acid reflux and he had chronic diarrhea. He had high blood pressure. He's a pitta. He was an Army colonel, so he's a trial attorney, a federal prosecutor. He fills literally every checkbox of too much fire that has gone wild. And rather, regardless of the fact that the genetics are there, so obviously there's some type of genetic proponent going through my family line, because my grandfather had diverticulitis, my grandmother, I think, had some issues, my dad's parents, and then my dad, and then me, and then actually my son, who's now 20. All diagnosed with Crohn's disease. However, what I've learned now by really diving into Ayurveda is, yes, there is a genetic propensity to have these same issues all across, cancers, autoimmune diseases, whatever it may be. But that also runs through the Ayurvedic philosophy of doshas, because my dosha, my pitta comes from my dad, my vata comes from my mom. Neither of them have much kapha. I don't have much kapha. And my kids kind of run through that same line. So before there was DNA and before we understood chromosomes, thousands of years ago, we did understand that we brought traits with us from our family. It was just looked at in a way that's a very different identification system than we have now. But when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, I was immediately put on medications to suppress my immune system. And I was a 19-year-old journalism major. I didn't know the first thing about medicine. All I knew is my dad took pills for this, my mom took pills for that. And I had been pretty much without taking anything except for the fact I'd had stomach aches for years. and I had had strep throat for years. And so I had consistently and constantly been on antibiotics, which we now know how the effect of those can have on our microbiome, how it affects our gut and our ability to break down foods, how it affects the direct line to our brain to be able to process and have everything working in an optimal way. So my belief now is that all of those antibiotics, and then having my tonsils removed as a 17-year-old, likely fed me right into the diagnosis of Crohn's disease, because I had destroyed my gut, and because on paper my dad had this disease, it was quite clear that I must have it too. And I don't dispute that. I dispute the way it was treated. So I immediately, as a journalism student, started looking into, why do we use these drugs? Why do we stop the immune system from working so well? Why would we want to stop our body from doing what it's meant to be doing? And questioning everything. I started buying books. I was in Georgia at the time. Not a whole lot of books on Ayurveda, yoga, or any type of alternative healing. So I found myself going to like mom and pop bookstores and going through their clearance tables, looking for things that nobody wanted. And that's where I bought my first books. I remember seeing the word Ayurveda, didn't know how to pronounce it. And that enough for me kind of scared me off at the time. You know, I was young and just, just didn't, I don't know why. For some reason, I didn't want to follow that line. It was too complicated, only because I couldn't pronounce the word. Well, fast forward through about 15 years where I was on very strong immune suppressant drugs. I was on high doses of steroids like prednisone for very long periods of time. I ended up going on a low-level leukemia drug, low-level chemotherapy. I was one of the first patients in the United States to take this it was right after the FDA, like the day the FDA released it. I was living in Kentucky at the time, and I had just given birth to my daughter, my first child, which I thought would be my only child. I was having a very, very challenging time post-delivery with my Crohn's disease, and they put me on this drug in a hospital. So they were putting it through my veins, and within a couple of weeks, I started having side effects. I also started feeling better within about 3 or 4 weeks, which was wonderful, but it wasn't that much better. And I went through what many people go through when they take either low or high levels of chemotherapy. For me, it was low headaches, nausea, hair loss, memory loss, and just malaise and a bit of vertigo, or migraines, not vertigo. Then my son was born. I got pregnant the second time, and I wasn't expecting to have a second child. Apparently I was feeling good enough a few of those nights, but so my husband and I were like, well, we're having 2 kids. And what I hadn't thought about at that moment was the fact that I had been on this drug for a year, or about 8 months. And when my son was born, it was a very tough pregnancy for me, and I did not take the medicine while I was pregnant. I took other medicines, but I didn't take the IV drug. When my son was born, within a year, I knew that things weren't right with him. He had severe eczema. He was diagnosed with asthma very quickly and put on a nebulizer. He was given steroids. He was given creams and medications that caused him to scream and cry. And it was a brutal, brutal awakening for me to be sick on my own, and to have a son that was so tiny and so sick. And I was married at the time to a pilot who was gone a lot. And so it was just a lot on my plate. And then I had this little girl, my daughter, who was healthy at the time and needing just, to have some kind of normalcy. But mama was sick and mama's baby was sick. And that over time, I would say 3 years. So when my son was 4 and my daughter was 6, the meds had quit working. They had not only quit working, but they had caused such severe side effects that I was on so many meds. I don't even remember what I was on at this point. Each drug gave a new drug to take for that side effect, and yada, yada, yada. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I felt like I was going to die. My intestines had become so inflamed that I could no longer swallow water. It was projectiled out of my body, and I could not hold food down, and I had not had a bowel movement in almost 6 weeks, and it's unheard of, but nothing was getting through my colon. Nothing was moving through my small intestine, and I had doctors that just didn't seem to care. And so finally I switched doctors. Biggest takeaway I received out of that experience after 5 different doctors was never be afraid to fire your doctor if they're not serving you well. And my doctor was clearly not serving me well. He wasn't even aware that I had become almost fatally allergic to the drug, completely oblivious and not paying attention to me. So I had major surgery. I had a small bowel resective surgery where they took out a bunch of my guts and stitched me back together and sent me on my way. Hospitalized for a couple of weeks. It was a really major shift in my life, but I made a pact with myself that when I came out of this experience, I was going to stop allopathic medicine. And I'm not here to like encourage you to do that. Well, I'm kinda, but I mean, that's not my place, but it was my goal, because what I was learning from allopathic medicine for me was it was only making me sicker. And I was now 34 years old and I have lost almost 15 years of quality living. I had had a good life, but it was a struggle every single day. And I literally had pain every day of my life. So now I had surgery. Post-surgery, a couple of months, I'm going through a very, very slow recovery, and they put me on a new drug. Some of you probably heard of methotrexate, which is kind of a long-standing drug used for leukemia. And this one was supposed to be a little easier on my system, and I could inject it myself every week and go along living like nothing was wrong for the rest of my life. And that was literally how I was kind of sent on my way. And I didn't want to do it, but I did it anyways because of the pressure of my doctor, the pressure of my husband, the pressure of my brother, my parents, everyone around me was just like, why wouldn't you take the drug? Because they didn't know how bad it could be being on these drugs. So I started the meds, and within 3 weeks, I just knew there was no way I was going to do this the rest of my life. Absolutely no way. So I stopped, and I told my doctor that I was going to and I was doing other things. I didn't just stop and do nothing. I'd always eaten well. I took good care of myself. I realized my limits. I live in a place with a lot of adrenaline sports, and those were not going to be my sports because I didn't have that kind of capacity. And I came to terms with that. I was kind of slightly competitive, and I realized that was going to do me zero good. And I started studying yoga. I'd already been practicing yoga for years, and now I wanted to really dive into, and that was accessible for me. And having that accessibility to something that I could do, I could move my body, I could breathe into my body, I could talk to my body. And then I, from there, became a yoga instructor, moved to California, found a phenomenal teacher who really taught me the true ancient ways of yoga, not the American version so much. And that meant understanding Ayurveda. Because Ayurveda and yoga have always been sister sciences. They weren't two different factions that might come together in some case or some way. They were always a part of each other. If you understood yoga, you didn't go to a yoga class, you just lived it. You lived a yogic life. There's creeds, there's oaths, not really oaths, but we have, ways of behaving, being kind, being empathetic, being honest, kind of similar to the 10 Commandments, but without the word do not and shall not throughout it. It's more of like things that we do to be better humans and to walk lightly on this earth. And it just made sense to me. I was raised in a very strict Catholic home, and it never really resonated with me, and it caused a lot of grief and pain and disruption with my parents and I. But this felt right, not as a religion, but as something that I could believe in and I could actively do, and I felt better. Through that, because I was introduced to Ayurveda, I then went to see an Ayurveda practitioner, someone who'd been practicing for 30 years in San Diego, because I was having pain. And I was worried that maybe my disease was coming back. I had so much fear in all the potential things that could go wrong in my body. And I was terrified of cancer because the meds I'd been taking, many of them I was told you should not take for more than 10 days. I took for 13 years, or 1 year I took for 5 years. So the letters and the warnings from the pharmaceuticals definitely put a huge fear in me of getting too sick to take care of my children. So I went to see an Ayurveda practitioner and told him my concerns. And I didn't know anything about Ayurveda except what I learned in yoga school, which was more than most, but yet still nothing compared to what I now know I needed to know. And so he looked at me, and he probably quite quickly figured out what my dosha was. And he quite quickly understood what was out of balance. And he put me on some very gentle herbs. And within a month, it was night and day difference. So I took my son to see him because my son had so many health issues, and same thing. He kind of looked at my son, asked a few questions. It was a little mystic at the time. It was not the way I operate, but I didn't know. But my son on some herbs, my son at the time, I think was 9. And it was amazing. I mean, it was the first time I could concretely see a shift in his suffering. Same with my daughter. My daughter had a almost fatal brain injury, and it has created years of things that go wrong when your brain is traumatized, and she had a fall, and that created some immune issues when she was going through puberty, including getting swine flu and getting mono and having so many just illnesses that kept attacking her ability for her immune system to work. Tried her on some herbs, like specific herbs for what she was dealing with, and we found relief. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to school because this is life-changing for me. I mean, this truly is a different way of looking at the whole universe that I've never been exposed to. I was raised pretty traditionally. And so I enrolled in a top program out of India that had an American presence. And I had these new doctors that were MDs, and they had an Ayurvedic doctor background, and my mind was blown wide open. And I, in every class, I think I raised my hand and said, why aren't we taught this in kindergarten? This would change the world if it's kind of like cannabis, like I was talking in the last panel. I mean, if everyone understood the benefits, the potential benefits to a plant that has so much good in it when taken care of properly. Same with Ayurveda. If everyone understood what we have at our fingertips that Mother Nature provides, it would change the world. And that's how the world used to operate way back in a long time ago, when women were queens and in charge of things, because that did happen a long time ago. And so this was like bringing me back to some roots I didn't even know I had. And through that, I was able to stay off prescription medicine since 2004 for Crohn's disease. I don't even feel like I have the disease anymore. I do know that my body still struggles on a daily basis with an immune system that is very delicate and rarely right in the middle of where it should be. It presents itself for me more in my joints. I have chronic pain in my joints and in my spine. I have degenerative arthritis, severe in my spine. I had a car accident in the midst of all this when I was 20, and three accidents in my late 30s. So this body's been through a lot. But when you start understanding Ayurveda and you start cooking differently, and Ayurveda is about, a couple things are really important about Ayurveda. Routine, understanding your dosha, routine, which includes sleep, which like sleep and routine are so important. I mean, it really is just make sure you're sleeping and sleeping within certain hours, and understanding circadian rhythms and when we need to be sleeping for our body to rest and recover and to truly digest the experiences of life. Because when we talk about digestion in Ayurveda, we're not just talking about digesting what you had for lunch. We're talking about digesting what you saw on your screen, what words you heard, what movies you watched, what music you listened to, what conversations you had, what you heard from your loved ones, what you said to your loved ones, what's going on in the world, what's going on geopolitically, and what's going on in your gut. It's all about understanding your five senses, how your five senses are the gateways to your mind, and that our mind controls so much of our body and controls so much of this, if not everything, of our life and the story that we create. So there's a lot of philosophy behind in the Ayurvedic world. There's a lot of kind of deep soul searching, like who are you? What is your purpose on this planet? What are you here to do for others and for yourself? And how are you going to best take care of this temple, this body that you're living in right now, so that you can go out in the world and do the best that you can for humanity and for nature. And Ayurveda is really about that. It's about living, how to be wise in the way you live. And one of the things we love in Ayurveda with our routines are our oils. And so everything in Ayurveda really comes down to what we put on our skin, what we put in our body, what we take in through our five senses. So we love oils, we love good spices, we love cooked foods, we love lots of fresh, clean water, moving our body, setting intentions, creating time to meditate. All of these things are part of the Ayurveda experience. And it has proven to me to change my life. And it has shown me very clearly that it can really create a body of wellness within you without necessarily having to cater to or to be a slave to pharmaceuticals for the rest of your life. So I like to pause there. I know that's a lot of information, and I just wanted to give a few kind of overviews of how, what, where, and why, and see if anyone has any questions.
So I'm gonna I'm gonna just say really quick. Hi, it's Katie from To Live.
Okay.
Thank you. That was so informative. I think you know, at the beginning when you were sort of walking through the doshas, I think if we had had our videos on, I think people would have been raising their hands when you were describing certain types for sure. So that was really interesting. That it's actually like, for me, that there are certain characteristics, like physical body characteristics associated with certain energies. That was really fascinating.
It really is. And, you know, it's now that I've been in this world, through looking at the world through an Ayurvedic lens for so long, I can't help it. Like in my head, I'm immediately like, oh, lots of vata, oh, kapha, oh, wait, it's, you know, and then not trying to judge a book by its cover, but at the same time, in a relationship, it tells you so much. If you know your dosha and your partner's dosha, you can be way more forgiving because you see what things are really kind of ingrained in who you are, and what we can do to then soften it a little bit, and then find that dance with our friends, coworkers. You know, one thing I think is important in business, and I started a business a few years ago, and you know, I learned about myself, and other people have told me, oh, you're the visionary, you're the one that creates the ideas. And they're right, I'm pretty good at that. And I used to be, before I trusted in my ideas, I was more of the get things done, make the list to do, and more of the pitta, the fiery person. And then you want that person, but I was never the person that would daily make sure I did everything each day and kept everything paid and on time. You can't do all three. And so the ideal business has your visionary, your creator, your vata, your artistic creative one, and then it has your director, that pitta fiery energy. Katie, I'm kind of looking at you and nodding there. And then it has make sure or both of you, I don't know, twin thing, I can't keep up, and then that's the interesting part with Ayurveda. And then you have that person that, you know, kind of the bookkeeper and the executive assistant, and make sure everything runs and pays the bills and insurance. You have to have all three, because we all have our strengths, and we can't even imagine that we can try to do all three, but then something usually goes out of balance.
Yeah, I think what I found interesting, of course, I was like, pitta, yeah, that's just, I was like to a T almost. But what was interesting is
hair and freckles.
right. Is that exactly the point you made, is that, you know, it offers an opportunity for empathy, you know, for other people and understanding. And Kelly and I talk about this a lot, is just meeting people where they're at. Everybody's pain is their own. It's real. It's how they're going through the world. It's not to be judged against someone else's pain or against someone else's experience, because it's your body, it's what you're living, right? So, but understanding that there are people that are seeing that world through a different lens than you are, and seeing it through a different body and an experience, you know, really does allow for that opportunity to just be a little bit more empathetic and say, oh, you know, I may want this thing done right this second. Please send me all your bios, whatever, right? You know, not everyone operates on that same, you know, thing. And it really is interesting to go, oh, maybe it's just an imbalance, you know, if we can find those, then other ways to create balance, and take that energy down a little bit. Yeah, I'm excited to go check out your website a little bit more. Joe, why don't you tell people where they can find you too, and where they can get more information on ZV Botanicals, or, oh wait, I think we have a couple questions.
Yeah, sorry. Megan wanted to ask what school you were enrolled in for Ayurvedic. What was the school that you?
Kerala Ayurveda, Kerala Ayurveda. They are a fabulous school, online and in person. I mean, COVID's kind of a weird thing right now, but they're flexible with correspondence. I also attended, before that, the American Institute of Vedic Studies with Dr. David Frawley, who's one of my favorite teachers, and I read all his books. And his books are the textbooks for many of the textbooks for Kerala. So I've gone through I'm not done. I've got years left of school. I'm on sabbatical right now while I'm trying to get a business up and running. My website is, okay, it's in transition. It works right now, but it's going to be way better in about 2 weeks. But it's Z as in Zana, V as in Veda. So Zana Veda is my company, but the website is zvbotanicals.com. And I both have, I make products, but there's also a lot of my blogs on there are I'm about education and empowerment. And our tagline is "Be a rebel, heal yourself," because that's what I had to do, basically defy doctors, parents, everyone else, and go on my own path to get to where I am today. And it's still not always agreed upon. The father of my children doesn't always agree with the way what I've done, but at the same time, my kids are on no medications, and they both have had life-threatening. I didn't even go into my son's broken backs and pancreas. I mean, we've had so many health emergencies and ambulances. I can't remember them all. And neither of my children take any meds, and they're 20 and 22, and they have a very healthy relationship with like their routines and their foods and herbs and even cannabis, to where they understand. They don't always follow through, but they understand now the differences, which is really important for me. Any other questions? Because I don't see the chat box.
But you don't see the chat box. So for those of us who are hearing this word for the first time and are, getting this experience for the first time, like, where's a good place for us to start? Your blog is a good place to start, obviously, but like, if we're even just trying to figure out, just things personally that we want to research or find, what do you suggest?
Sure. So my website has one, and it doesn't have an interactive dosha quiz right now. It's just not working. The plugin failed. So that's part of what's being fixed, but it does have an evaluation where you can just on paper, you can answer the questions, but just do them on your own. And at the end, it will give you can just tally it. So that's kind of a fun start. I would say, there's a great company called Banyan Botanicals, and they're one of my favorite Ayurvedic companies. They also have a fantastic website as far as they do have the interactive quiz. They've got more money than I do probably for their website, and their plugins work better than mine, but they are a great resource. We have a lot of the same like medical directors for their company also are some of my teachers. Kerala is a great reference point. They do online free like weekly things. You can join, just sign up for their newsletter. That would be my first choice, would be Kerala, because this is run by doctors and practitioners from all over the world. They do big retreats in India that are as authentic. Like my main teacher, Dr. Jay Rajan, he was raised in a home with parents and grandparents in southern India, in Kerala. So Kerala, India, which is in southern India, was one of the only places in India that was able to preserve the knowledge of Ayurveda, because the British pretty much ripped it out of all of India and wanted to completely eradicate the belief system. And some scholars back in the day buried books in southern India or in Kerala. And so those are what have been uncovered over the last 80 years, translated, and what are being retaught to the world today in over 30 countries.
And can you spell that name again so that we can look that up too?
Kerala, K as in kangaroo, E-R-A-L-A. Kerala Ayurveda. And I think there'll be two. There's Kerala Ayurveda Academy, I think is the US one. And then if you type, there's another way you can type it in, it'll take you to the Kerala, India, which has been a large hospital and school since 1941. This school has phenomenal tradition. All the herbs that we use are either hand harvested or organically grown, wild harvested and hand picked. They're very, very they're stewards of the land. There's some misinformation on the web that will tell you that Ayurveda does all these bad things with leads and things like that, but it's a smear campaign that happened about 10 years ago, and I won't waste time. Yeah. It's not true.
Okay. All right. I don't see any other questions for you, Jo, but I'm so grateful that you joined To Live to Cure to do this, both panels, and helping with other volunteer yoga practitioners, which have all been incredible so far. So thank you so much, because really events like this, we just kind of have to do this way right now. We can't reach everyone at home and wherever they are. So we're grateful to have you come to wherever we are and put this.
We did post those websites in the chat for Banyan Botanicals and Jo's website as well. So please feel free to go check those out. Maybe do that quiz and then see if Jo's got some botanicals that can help you rebalance your doshas.
I'll pitta, no. No.
Thank you, Jo.
No kapha.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We hope you'll join us for the rest of our event as well this evening. We have a pencil art sketch class and recipe swap soon. So come back for some more sessions. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day.